In the darkness between stars, not all empires rise with fire. Some grow in quiet, like a whisper passed between worlds. Tonight we drift into a different kind of tale. One not forged by fury, but shaped by purpose. Not born in thunder, but in the glow of distant promises. The Tau Empire, small, young, and strange in the galaxy's eyes. Where most conquer with chains, the Tau offer something else. A vision, a cause. They call it the greater good, but what lies behind the smiles of diplomats and the gleam of plasma rifles? How did a forgotten species rise so quickly while ancient powers slept? And why do some Tau turn away from the very thing they swore to uphold? This story carries no screaming battles, no heroes locked in endless struggle. Only echoes. Forgotten messages across cold systems. A people trying to find meaning in a war-torn galaxy. And the soft steps of an empire that believes it can offer peace, even as it becomes something else. So close your eyes. Let the stars stretch wide. Let the hum of the void speak low, and listen to the tale of the Tau. The galaxy is old. It remembers empires that rose like suns and died like sparks. From the quiet dark of its fringe, a newer flame flickered. Small at first, almost missed by the Imperium's tired eye. The Tau were not made for this galaxy. Not at first. They were tribal, divided by clan and region, scattered across plains and mountains. They hunted with spears and flew simple machines through open skies. But time would not let them rest in such innocence. In the deep past, Imperial explorers found their world. Blue-skinned, primitive, worth little. Plans were made to destroy them, cleanse the world, and mark it as empty. But then came the storms. Warp storms sealed the Tau's space from the outside. The Mechanicus withdrew. For thousands of years, no human hand touched that sky. And in the stillness, something changed. The Tau evolved fast. Too fast. Their skins shifted. Their minds sharpened. Then, without warning, the Ethereals appeared. No one saw where they came from. No records show their rise. But when they spoke, the wars stopped. Tribes laid down weapons. Cities listened. A new belief spread like sunrise. They called it the greater good, and everything followed. Long before the stars knew their name, the Tau were only dust and wind. Their home, the planet of Tau, lay at the edge of the galaxy, a place not marked by beauty or fire, but by quiet skies and long silences. Its land stretched dry and bare. Its seasons gave little. The sun above it burned pale, and its moons cast soft shadows. There were no cities, no signals, just herds and high cliffs, forests broken by sharp wind, and tribes that had not yet found each other. The people of Tau survived, but they did not thrive. Life moved slowly. Each tribe learned its own ways. Some stayed high in the cold hills, building with stone, crafting weapons to defend against wild beasts. Others roamed the plains with long-legged creatures they had tamed, moving from stream to stream. Along the rivers, new paths formed. A few fished and traded, speaking in signs more than words. They made fire, shaped tools, and tracked the stars. But they were not yet one people. They had no single vision. Then came the Watchers. In the 35th millennium, the Imperium saw them. Explorers from the Adeptus Mechanicus found the Tau, while charting new paths across the eastern fringe. At first they saw nothing but a primitive race, divided, weak, armed with arrows, knives, and slow speech. Machines were rare, structures simple. Their thoughts were seen as small, plans were made. Cleansing the world would be easy. A few orbital strikes, perhaps. Toe would be wiped from memory before it ever entered record. But the galaxy did not agree. As preparations began, something stirred in the warp. A storm thickened in the space around Tau. A great warp storm, wide and deep, blocked all travel. It rose like a wall of fire, separating the planet from the stars. Ships were turned away, communications failed, the world was sealed, and the Adeptus Mechanicus moved on, as if it had never found anything at all. That storm would last for thousands of years. In that silence, the Tau changed. Alone, untouched by the wider galaxy, they moved quickly. Their minds sharpened. Their skills rose. In just a few short centuries, they passed from huts to hives. Their knowledge swelled. They learned flight. They built farms with working power. They built machines to dig, craft, and lift. They shaped steel. They began to speak across distance. They studied wind, pressure, and motion. They mapped their planet, and slowly, they found each other. But progress is not peace. Old rivalries returned. New wars broke out. As tools improved, so did weapons. The fire tribes began to forge armor. The builders, now the Earth Caste, shaped cities into walls. The Air Caste grew from those who flew. They mastered the sky and watched the ground from far above. The Water Caste rose as traders, diplomats, and record keepers. They crossed battle lines to speak where others fired. Still, no unity held them. Battles would pause, but never end. Each group grew strong, but they moved in their own way. War returned with better tools and faster deaths. And then, when it seemed no side would win, they arrived. No one knows when the first Ethereal stepped onto a battlefield. The stories differ. Some say they walked out of the sky, bathed in soft gold. Others say they came from the old cities, awakened by something no Tau could name. What matters is that once they came, everything changed. They were not soldiers. They wore no great armor. Yet their presence silenced war. Where they stood, weapons lowered. Where they spoke, feuds ended. They spoke of unity, of a greater path, not just survival, but purpose. And the Tau listened. That was the true birth of their empire. No force on Tau had ever done what the Ethereals did with voice alone. The castes accepted their place, not with chains, but with choice. The Fire Caste would defend, the Earth Caste would build, the Water Caste would bridge, and the Air Caste would rise. Each had worth, each had meaning. All served something greater. They called it the greater good. And from that point on, the Tau moved as one. The Imperium did not see this happen. To its records, Tau remained a lost world, forgotten behind warp storms. But in the shadows of that silence, an empire began to form. Its roots were not soaked in blood. They were drawn in ink, spoken in circles, lifted by agreement. The Tau believed they were building something new, a way of life where strength served peace, not control. But even then, questions waited. From the moment the Ethereals arrived, they were more than leaders. Their presence changed things. Fear melted near them. Anger dropped to calm. Warriors who had never bowed before now followed in silence. No command was needed, only presence. The Tau never spoke of it as strange. They saw it as guidance, as purpose made flesh. But others, those who would later study the Empire, found it unsettling. The Inquisition speaks of it in whispers. How could such unity spread so fast? How could a whole species turn from war to peace without force? The Tau do not use psychers. They show no signs of warp-touched minds, but something lingers. Some believe it is in the air. Others think it lies in sound, in scent, in signals too subtle to name. The Ethereals would never answer. Whatever the cause, the effect was real. The castes took their places. The cities rose faster. Technologies surged. Ships lifted into orbit. Satellites blinked above the world. What had taken old Earth thousands of years, the Tau did in a fraction. The warp storm that once hid them began to fade, and by the time it cleared, the Tau had already begun to look outward. What the Imperium had ignored had now become something more, not a threat, but a vision. And it would not remain quiet for long. Once the Tau stood as one, they found something deeper than order, something larger than peace. It was not carved into stone or passed from the stars. It was a thought that shaped itself into a path. They called it the greater good. Not every race in the galaxy has a truth to follow. Some fight because they must. Others serve because they fear. But for the Tau, the greater good became a reason to live, a reason to fight, a reason to build, trade, and move forward. It was more than belief. It was structure. Each caste had a role, not chosen by fate, but by design. The Fire Caste trained for war, but not for conquest. Their duty was to protect. They were taught that sacrifice was not shameful if it served the whole. The Earth Caste studied design and shaped every tool that kept the cities strong. The Air Caste moved between stars, thin and fast, born for speed and silence. The Water Caste handled talk, trade, and peace. They built bridges with words and softened borders with charm, but the Ethereals stood apart. They did not build, or fight, or fly. They guided. They watched. They spoke only when needed, yet every voice paused when they did. To the Tau, this was natural. It brought balance. The greater good could not live without balance. It is easy to call this unity, but deeper still, it became obedience. Most empires in the galaxy rule with pain. The Imperium burns cities to hold others in place. Chaos twists the mind until nothing of the self remains. But the Tau do not conquer in that way. They do not need to crush, they ask. And when the answer is no, they ask again, until the no fades.
At first, that seems noble, peaceful. But when peace becomes rule, it begins to change.
No caste may question its place. A fire warrior who dreams of art must leave that dream behind. An earth engineer cannot refuse a design. The greater good speaks not to the individual, but to the whole, and the whole must be served without hesitation. To many Tau, this is not a burden, it is purpose. But to those who see past the surface, it is also weight. There is no room to stand alone, no space to ask why. And in time, that silence grows thick. Imperial scholars who have studied captured records often ask the same thing. How did this belief spread so far, so fast? What shaped it? What enforced it? The answers are hard to find. The Tau do not write about resistance. They do not discuss rejection. They simply move forward. Among the Inquisition, theories build in secret halls. Some say the Ethereals use something chemical. that their skin releases signals too fine to detect, that these signals calm the mind and direct emotion. Others believe the Ethereals are more than Tau, that they were altered by something lost, perhaps touched by the warp, yet invisible to its chaos. There is no proof, only patterns. When an Ethereal stands, even the most bloodthirsty fire-caste warrior bows his head, not out of fear, but peace. When an Ethereal enters a room, voices lower, eyes focus, even wild thoughts grow still. It does not feel like command, it feels like rightness, and that makes it harder to resist. But among the Tau, this is not seen as strange. It is seen as good, as holy, even if the word is never used. The greater good teaches that the group must thrive, that no one part can rise above the rest, that selfishness is decay. Even the idea of personal glory feels wrong in Tau speech. A commander does not boast. A worker does not demand reward. Service is its own honor. Unity is the goal. This is the heart of the Empire. It explains why the Tau build not only ships and cities, but communities. Their worlds are ordered, clean. Their systems run without famine or riot. Crime is rare. Want is low. And when a problem appears, it is solved not with fear, but redirection. A worker placed poorly is moved, not punished. A soldier who fails is taught, not shamed. But not all answers are soft. When true dissent arises, it is removed, quietly. There are no public trials, no mass arrests. There are only new transfers, new postings, disappearances that raise no voices. The greater good must not fracture, even if that means cutting away parts too small to notice. Outsiders do not often see this side. To other races, the Tau present their dream with care. Human worlds left behind by the Imperium are approached with gifts: food, power, shelter. Those who join are given positions. Those who resist are corrected slowly, first with talks, then with soldiers, then if needed with silence. It works. Entire systems now serve the greater good, not because they were taken, but because they were welcomed. But welcome can be a kind of pressure. It leaves no room for refusal without guilt. It tells the lost that they are found, and if they say no, it must be because they are broken. Some see this as peace, others as control. Inside the Empire, the Doctrine holds. No caste breaks. No Ethereal steps down. And belief remains strong, taught from birth, reinforced by every symbol, every statue, every shared meal. The greater good is not a flag, it is a lens. It turns every decision into a question of service. Is this good for me, or is it good for all? The Tau are told not to ask the first.
Only the second matters.
And in that single choice, a civilization holds its shape. But when a dream grows too wide, it begins to stretch, and some cracks do not show until the light changes. When the Tau turned their eyes to the stars, it was not with hope alone. They looked upward with a plan, a shape already forming in the minds of their leaders. The greater good could not live forever in silence. It needed to move. It needed space. And so the castes prepared. But it was the fire caste who stepped forward first. They were not bred for speech or structure. They did not shape tools or build cities. They were shaped for motion, for defense, for combat. Their limbs were thick, their frames dense, their faces set with focus. They lived by the code of Kauyon and Montka, two paths of war. One was the patient hunter, the other the swift strike. From youth, they were trained to understand both, and when the time came, they moved as one body. Unlike the Astartes of the Imperium, who fought with overwhelming force and divine pride, the Fire Caste walked with duty. Each warrior was not a hero. They were a piece of something larger. They were told not to seek glory. They were told to serve. Yet they were not weak. Before they left their world, they trained in fire and storm. They drilled against machines and simulations crafted by the Earth Caste. They studied past battles. They watched the ways animals hunted. They looked at how weather shifted and struck. Their warfare was not born from rage. It was born from rhythm. The first Tau warships were not massive. They did not shine with endless guns or carry city-sized reactors. But they were fast, precise. The Fire Caste moved through them like blood through a living body. Dropships launched in silence. Squads deployed in calm. Each carried pulse rifles, energy weapons that hit with startling speed. Where humans fired in bursts, the Fire Caste fired in rhythm. Still, it was not enough. The early years of expansion were not filled with victory. The galaxy is cruel to new blood. They met raiders on the rim. Kroot mercenaries turned against them. Old machines woke in silence on ruined moons. Even among drifting stations, strange echoes struck without warning. Entire units vanished. Fire warriors stood firm, but they were outmatched. Their tactics were new, their enemies seasoned. One ship drifted into a storm of claws. Another found itself ambushed by a species that vanished into walls. They learned hard lessons, and they learned fast. Where others would have pulled back, the Fire Caste changed. They tested new armor. They adjusted drone logic. They shortened landing times. The Earth Caste worked day and night beside them. They reworked rifles. They added shielding to key joints. They created sensor webs that could map terrain seconds after landing. It was not about pride. It was about survival. Each lost squad became a study. Each failure, a note in the next drill. And with every step, the Fire Caste grew sharper. Commanders rose from these trials. Figures like Farsight, like Shadow Sun. But this chapter does not yet belong to them. It belongs to the silent rise of those who held the line before history noticed. Thousands of warriors whose names were not written, but whose deaths kept the future alive. The Fire Caste moved from defense to offense. They began to hold ground. They secured moons with layered drones and forward relays. They coordinated with air caste pilots who could drop supplies through narrow canyons without leaving orbit. And behind them, the water caste sent voices. This was the shape of their push. Warriors arrived first. If resistance was low, terms followed. If resistance was high, fire swept clean. But never more than needed. The Fire Caste was taught not to waste. Not fuel, not breath, not even death. And as they moved, the Empire began to take form. Worlds once alone heard the pulse of Tau weapons. Then they heard the hum of Tau cities. The Fire Caste became more than soldiers. They became symbols. When others saw them standing at the edge of a burning field, they saw not an enemy, but a door. Some stepped through, others refused. The Tau did not beg. Yet even in refusal there was room to learn. The Fire Caste took failure as fuel. If a world fought back, they returned stronger. If a pattern was missed, it became doctrine. It was not about conquest. It was about completion. The greater good must not be delayed. In those years, the Fire Caste developed more than tactics. They began to form something else, a spirit, a shape of pride not in victory, but in balance. A warrior who disobeyed was corrected, a warrior who hesitated was trained, but a warrior who fought in perfect step, who fired when the wind paused, who saw before others looked. That warrior became an example, not for praise, but for the path. The suits came next. Battle armor became more than defense. Crisis suits were born. The Earth Caste delivered prototypes. The Fire Caste tested them in ruins, on ash worlds, in the black dust of moons that held no name. These suits could leap, shift, fire from above. Inside them, the Fire Caste found new reach. No longer tied to the ground, they became shadows of war. The suits were not worn by all, only those who earned the right. There was no envy. The greater good did not allow room for self. Those chosen for suits trained longer, lived apart, ate differently. Their breath shifted in pressure. Their bones thickened, their eyes adjusted to new speed. Each suit was a promise, each battle a lesson. And as expansion grew, the suits multiplied. From orbit, the Fire Caste struck in clean lines, not to burn all, but to remove resistance. In one breath they entered. In the next, they held ground. They did not dig trenches like the Imperium. They laid grids, sensor webs, communication towers, and always the Ethereals watched. Their silence was louder than commands. Their presence reminded the warriors that this was not their war. It was the Empire's, and behind the armor, every fire warrior remembered it. Across the eastern fringe, rumors grew. Systems that had never known unity began to ask questions. Who were the Tau? How had they done so much in so little time? Why did they not come with chains? The answer stood in armor, and it never raised its voice. It simply waited, not as a threat, but as a shape. And shape is hard to destroy. The Fire Caste had become more than soldiers. They had become the front edge of a quiet truth, one that moved not with wrath, but with certainty. Their battles did not tell a story of power. They told a story of purpose, and in that purpose others began to listen. It began without sound. No war horns, no banners in the void, no proclamations made in fire. The first sphere expansion unfolded like morning mist across a valley, light where there had been none, calm where others had expected conquest. At the center of it all stood the greater good. This idea had become the Tau's most powerful tool, not a weapon of war, but a belief crafted into speech, structure, and action. And now, that belief had a direction. The Ethereals had spoken. The castes had moved. The fire warriors stepped forward, backed by quiet fleets and iron patience. The water caste planned routes and systems. The earth caste prepared to shape new worlds. The air caste readied the vessels that would carry the dream outward. It was not just about distance. It was about design. The first steps took them toward Dalith, Borken, and Viola, names now remembered as foundation stones, but then they were simply reachable stars. Each planet was approached not with threats, but with open purpose. The water caste did not send demands. They sent questions. What do you need? What have you lost? What would you trade for peace? To some worlds, the offers brought confusion. No empire had ever arrived with open hands. No ships had ever come bearing tools and healers instead of chains. The Tau were different. They did not ask for tribute. They offered shelter, medicine, machines that hummed with clean light. For backwater colonies and fringe settlements ignored by the Imperium, it was not a hard choice. They saw power, yes, but also balance. A world once buried in famine might wake to find food grown in days by Tau soil tenders, a broken generator replaced by an Earth caste worker with no words of praise, only quiet function. Villages on dust moons saw irrigation networks carved in days, not centuries. Children were taught to speak the Tau tongue alongside their own. To some it felt like salvation, but not every system bent. There were those who resisted. Some feared betrayal. Others clung to past loyalties. Still others simply wished to remain alone. The Tau did not punish these worlds with rage. Instead, they moved with measured force. The Fire Caste never struck out in wild anger. They targeted weapons, not civilians. They ended threats quickly, then paused. And once the guns were cold, the offer was made again. Join, grow, build, share. To some, this was manipulation. To others, it was vision. The Inquisition took note. They watched from afar, unsettled. A war that spreads in fire can be stopped, but one that spreads in thought moves too deep to see. It was here that the Tau showed their truest strength. Patience. They were not in a rush. They were not desperate. They moved in stages, setting down systems like seeds in a field. Where soil resisted, they waited. Where minds opened, they built. The first sphere grew outward. No single campaign marked its reach. It was 1,000 paths walked at once. On one planet, a water caste speaker would arrange alliance with an isolated moon clan. On another, fire caste warriors would halt a raid by feral orcs, then leave gifts behind for those who watched. Slowly, lines formed. They were not drawn in blood. They were drawn in function. A network took shape, planets linked by trade, by signal, by shared belief. Drones moved between colonies. Supplies flowed. Tau educational centers appeared on foreign soil. Alien youth studied the greater good with curiosity. Some were even granted limited access to Tau civic life, though they were always kept slightly apart. Equality was not promised. Harmony was. Some races resisted inclusion. Others asked to join and were welcomed. The Kroot, once wild mercenaries, found partnership. Their ways were not fully understood by the Ethereals, but their skills were valuable. They became one of the first auxiliaries. Their service in battle earned trust, though their hunger remained watched. The Vespid came next, strange, winged, and hard to understand. But the water caste cracked their speech. A method was found to link thought between species, a device worn behind the skull. When worn, Vespid followed orders with focus. Some questioned this. The Ethereals said it was aid, not control. The first sphere held more than Tau now. The galaxy did not respond at first. The Imperium saw only distant activity. A few lost systems. Nothing large. It had its own wars, its own rot. A young empire claiming empty stars seemed harmless, but a few watchers raised their voices. They said the Tau would not stop. They were not wrong. It was during this period that the name Oshova began to rise. Commander Farsight, still loyal, still trusted. He led with clarity. His battles were studied. His strikes became models. No excess, no waste. He brought victories that shaped maps. Though his story would darken later, these were the days when he was a hero, a warrior shaped by belief. His blade was swift, but his eyes looked ahead. He stood not as a symbol of power, but of focus. Under Farsight and others like him, the Fire Caste earned trust. They did not force peace. They created space for it. And in that space, the water caste worked wonders. Diplomats became architects. They listened before they spoke. They learned local customs. On one world, they wore native garb to show respect. On another, they studied old songs and adapted them into Tao music. Each step made the greater good feel less like invasion and more like alignment. This was not an accident. The water caste trained for this role. They spent years in observation. They memorized species behavior. They practiced restraint. A single misstep could delay talks for a generation. They could not afford pride. And so the first sphere continued. Each world added became a node in a growing net. A colony here, a shipyard there, refueling stations hidden in asteroid belts, listening posts deep in dark space. Though not built with fear, the Tau still understood threat. Their systems were designed with defense in mind. If enemies came, they would be met with range and reason. At the center of this web stood the Ethereals, always distant, rarely visible, but their words shaped the rhythm of it all. Every expansion was blessed. Every new system tied back to them. And slowly the empire gained form, not a scattered chain, but a body, with limbs, mind, and breath. This was not growth for its own sake. It was a step towards something the Tau had never known, a future not shaped by ruin, but by intention. They were not trying to match the Imperium. They were trying to offer something else, something clean. But the galaxy is not a silent place. In time, others would hear them. Some would listen. Some would strike, and some would disappear before they could choose. By the time the first sphere had grown firm in shape, the Tau were no longer seen as a scattered people. They were an empire, young, yes, but focused. Their stars were lit by calm design. Their systems ran with order. Cities rose from dry ground in clean shapes. Roads, towers, fields, all moved with purpose. Nothing was wasted. Nothing stood out. Each part served the greater good. To the Tau, this was harmony, not forced, but chosen. Life in the Empire meant shelter, water, power, and safety. There were rules, but they were clear. There was structure, but it worked. Most who lived under the Tau flag did not look back. Even alien races brought into the Empire found roles to play. They were not equal, but they were not hunted. They were used, yes, but not broken. Tau void ships grew larger. The Corvatra fleet was not built for raw strength. It was built for distance and control. Escorts moved in patterns. Carriers spread drones across wide space. When they fought, they struck from range. But most of the time, they did not need to fire. They came to bring talks, not terror. The water caste guided those talks. Their envoys became known for soft words and sharp offers. They learned how to read fear, pride, and silence. They found paths where swords would have failed. Behind them, the fire caste waited. Never far, always ready, but rarely needed. Every system added to the Empire brought more than land. It brought resources, workers, minds, ideas, and the Tau used it all. They adapted fast. They studied everything. A broken drone on a border world would lead to 10 new designs. One strange species with a gift for building would find its place in a factory orbiting a core world. The Empire became a machine of many parts, and it did not stop turning. Inside the Imperium, few understood this growth. Some believed it was trickery. Others saw it as luck. A few noticed the pattern, and those few raised their voices. They said the Tau would not stop. that this dream of the greater good would keep spreading, that its calm voice was louder than it seemed. But the Imperium was busy. It had wars of its own. It had heretics to burn and hive worlds to feed. One more Xenos race on the edge of space did not seem urgent. Not yet. And so the Tau continued. From a single world on a forgotten edge, they had become a cluster of strength. They did not act in haste. They did not make wild moves. But each year, another world was brought in. Another race gave a nod. Another system turned blue on the maps drawn in Tau halls. The second sphere would not come for many years, but the shape was already forming, not from force, from belief. And in the quiet between the stars, that belief was growing louder. For a time, the Tau spread with little pushback. The Imperium had watched, but had not acted. That changed when the Tau reached the Damocles Gulf. It was a wide stretch of stars that marked a rough edge between their rising empire and the Imperium's forgotten reach. The Tau moved carefully, claiming space without loud steps. But the Imperium saw it as a threat. What followed was the first full clash between the two. The Damocles Gulf Crusade began with Imperial force sent to strike deep into Tau space. Imperial Guard regiments were raised. Astartes were deployed. They did not come to speak. They came to end. The fighting was sharp. Worlds burned. Cities fell. The Tau, though skilled, had never faced the weight of the Imperium's fury. Their tactics were fast, their weapons precise, but they had not seen such scale. The Firecast held the line where it could, but the push was real. Then something odd happened. A ceasefire was called. Just as the war could have dragged on, it stopped. The Imperium pulled back. The reason remains debated. Some say the Tau offered terms. Others say the Imperium had other wars that needed those forces more. Whatever the cause, the guns fell silent. This moment changed how the galaxy saw the Tau. Before, they had been distant. Now they had fought the Imperium and survived. That alone was rare, and it gave the Tau more than space. It gave them weight. Inside the Empire, the message was clear. The greater good had endured. The Firecast had shown its strength. The Watercast framed the story well, turning a costly war into a tale of courage and purpose. The Ethereals, silent as always, gave no speeches, but their approval was felt in every broadcast and every ceremony that followed. The Imperium, for all its size, had not broken the Tau, and that changed how others viewed them. A rising power had faced the giant, and still stood. For many on the fringe, that was enough to start listening. The Damocles Gulf did more than test weapons. It tested belief, and belief held firm. The second sphere was not yet begun, but the path had cleared. And in that pause between wars, the Tau began to prepare for something larger, something deeper than simple growth. His name was Oshova. Among the Tau, he was called Farsight, a commander born of the Firecast, trained in patience and strike, shaped by war, yet moved by thought. He rose fast through the ranks, not just because of his aim or tactics, but because of the way he looked at a battlefield. Where others saw walls and targets, he saw rhythm and shape. He fought as if reading a story only he could understand. The early campaigns of the First Sphere made him known. His actions on Viorlos and Kaelshan were praised in every cast hall. Soldiers spoke his name with pride. Watercast envoys used his victories in speeches. Earthcast engineers studied how he moved forces across broken ground. The Ethereals approved. He seemed like the perfect tool of the greater good. A living proof that belief and discipline could overcome any fire. But war does not only shape bodies, it shapes thoughts. And something began to change in him. The shift was slow, not enough to raise alarm at first. But those close to him noticed. He started asking questions no one else asked. Not about tactics, but about purpose. About the way orders were given. About the role of the Ethereals. About why, in the midst of war, silence from above grew louder than instruction. The turning point came during the Arkunasha campaign. It was not meant to be a moment of doubt. It was supposed to be a victory. Tau forces were defending new holdings near the fringes of the expansion. Orc warbands had arrived, as they often did, with noise and force. The battle was long and bloody. Farsight led from the front, guiding his warriors with sharp thought and flawless movement. But something happened on that world. In later records, the Earth Caste noted that deep beneath Arkunasha, strange signals were detected. No origin was confirmed. The Fire Caste fought near ruins older than the planet's crust. Some of his troops saw machines that did not match any known Tau or Orc design. Shapes moved in the corner of their vision. Walls sang in tones not meant for sound. Then came the Dawn Blade. Farsight found it after the battle, a weapon that should not have existed. It shimmered with red energy. It was not made by Tau hands. It was older, sharper, carved with symbols that pulsed when drawn. When he picked it up, nothing stopped him. No Ethereal forbade it. No order arrived to return it for study, and he kept it. From that point on, the questions grew sharper. Why was he left alone in that campaign? Why did the Ethereals not send support when signs of warp-touched ruins emerged? Why did they not seek to understand what had been uncovered? He began to believe they already knew. In his next campaigns, he moved with more independence. He chose targets based on instinct, not just command. He began to rewrite field doctrine. His soldiers followed him, not out of fear, but because they trusted his eyes more than the voices from far away. Then came the final break. During a campaign to hold a new cluster of systems near the fringe, Farsight's fleet was cut off. Supply lines were disrupted. Communication with Central Command faded. The Ethereals sent orders to fall back and regroup. He did not obey. He chose to stay. He believed that the civilians and colonies under his protection would be slaughtered if left alone. His forces held position, repelled waves of attacks, built forward bases, and in time, secured the region entirely. But when word finally reached the heart of the Empire, he was not praised. He was condemned. Disobedience was not tolerated, not for any reason. Farsight was given a choice: return and face judgment or remain in exile. He chose exile. With a core of loyal warriors, engineers, and ships, he moved beyond the boundaries of the Tau Empire. He created what became known as the Farsight Enclaves. Independent, defended, functional, still holding to many Tau principles, still shaped by structure, but missing one thing: the Ethereals. In the Enclaves, there were no guiding voices from above, no caste oversight from the Central Council, no unseen force holding unity in place. And yet, they thrived. They held their space. They trained new warriors. They built ships. They maintained culture. All without a single Ethereal. To the main empire, this was a deep threat. The greater good was not just law. It was a spiritual path. It required the presence of the Ethereals to function. That was the belief. That was the doctrine. But the Enclaves had no Ethereals, and they did not fall. This fact was more dangerous than any enemy. The Ethereals labeled Farsight a heretic. His name was removed from many scrolls. His victories were reworded. His teachings were removed from cadet libraries. In some places, his name was never spoken aloud again. But among some in the Fire Caste, his story became legend. Not as a rebel, not as a traitor, but as a question. What if the Ethereals were not needed? What if the greater good could live without guidance from above? In the Inquisition's shadowed halls, this story caused concern. A Tau commander who had broken from control and continued to function posed a new kind of threat. Not a warrior, but an example. And then there was the matter of time. Farsight did not age. Records suggest that he lived far beyond his expected years. Centuries passed. His eyes remained sharp, his grip unshaken. The Dawn Blade, the strange weapon he found on Arkunasha, was believed to play a role. Some whispered that it had cursed him, that it fed on time. Others believed it kept him bound to something far darker. But Farsight did not speak of it. He led, he fought, he shaped his region with care and order. He did not return. He did not ask for forgiveness. He simply stood firm. Inside the Tau Empire, his name remains a closed door. Yet in the far reaches of space, his enclaves remain lit. Their beacons flash across stars not touched by ethereal command, and their warriors still wear the red of their founder. They speak of service.
They act with purpose.
They believe in the greater good.
But they believe in it alone. With Farsight gone and the enclaves sealed behind silence, the Tau turned their gaze outward again. The Empire had not stopped growing, but now it moved with greater care. It needed a new symbol, a new voice that could rise without breaking the path. That voice became Shadow Sun. Commander Shadow Sun was unlike Farsight in almost every way. Where he had been bold, she was patient. Where he had questioned, she obeyed. She became the face of the next great movement, the Third Sphere expansion. Under her lead, the Tau returned to growth, but this time their vision reached deeper into Imperial space. The Third Sphere began with fire. New weapons, new armor, new tactics. The Empire pushed into systems long held by human rule. Many of those places had been weakened by war or lost to neglect. The Tau offered terms. Some accepted, others fought. Either way, more stars turned blue. But then came the Fourth Sphere. It was supposed to be a leap, a step far beyond the reach of their past. The Tau built massive fleets and sent them into the dark. They were meant to find new frontiers, to spread the greater good farther than ever. And then they vanished. No signal came back, no word, no trace. For a time, the Fourth Sphere was lost, thought gone, a failure. The Empire turned inward in silence. But one day the ships returned. Something had changed. Those who came back were not the same. Their skin held marks. Their minds held pain. They spoke little of what happened. Only fragments escaped. A warp storm. A time that bent too far. Battles against things that did not belong in real space. Many among the Ethereals saw the return as a sign. The Tau were not yet ready to walk that far. Some whispered that the Fourth Sphere had touched places not meant to be seen. The returners were placed under deep care, watched, studied. Yet some saw strength in their survival, a glimpse that even through strange horrors the Tau could still hold fast. Not all lessons were clear. Not all wounds could be shown. The Fourth Sphere did not break the Empire, but it cracked the image of control. It reminded the Tau that the stars held things even belief could not shape, that beyond the mapped skies there were truths without peace. And still the Ethereals pushed forward. The next step was already being planned. Through every rise, through every sphere, one presence remained constant. The Ethereals. They guided every step. They gave shape to belief. They stood above the castes, not with weapons, but with presence. Their calm faces and gentle words held the empire together. At least, that was how it seemed. For most Tau, there was never a reason to doubt them. Life under their rule was ordered, food was delivered, homes were safe, education was shared. Even war had a shape that made sense, but in quiet corners, questions began to form. Farsight had left because of those questions. He had seen something that shook his trust. And even after his exile, his actions left marks. Small groups began to wonder why obedience mattered more than truth. Why no Ethereal ever stepped down? Why no Tau, once chosen for leadership, ever refused? Inside the Inquisition, there were deeper concerns. Imperial agents who studied the Tau up close saw strange patterns. When an Ethereal spoke, those around them grew calm. When they entered a room, even the wildest fire-caste soldier stood still. It was not just respect, it was control. Some believed the Ethereals used pheromones, a chemical force that shaped the minds of those near them. Others believed it was more than that some unknown force, perhaps even psychic, was at work. The Tau denied these claims. They spoke of trust, of faith, of unity. But no true studies were ever shared, no open tests allowed, and those who asked too much were often moved to other posts. Dissent inside the Empire remained rare. When it came, it was soft. A question in a hallway, a look left unanswered. But even small cracks speak of deeper stress. The belief in the greater good had held strong for many generations. But belief that cannot be questioned begins to harden. Even now the Ethereals walk among their people with grace. Their power does not fade. But the empire they built has grown large. It touches systems that do not think the same. It holds races that remember freedom in different shapes. That balance grows harder to hold.
The fifth sphere would rise soon. It would test what the Ethereals had made.
And the whispers, though few, would not stop. After the loss and return of the fourth sphere, many believed the Tau would wait. That they would slow their reach, rebuild what was lost, and look inward. But the Ethereals had no plan to pause. A new wave was forming, one that would push past known borders, even into the broken half of the Imperium. This was the beginning of the fifth sphere. The Cicatrix Maledictum, a vast rift across space, had split the galaxy in two. Warp storms made travel hard. Many Imperial worlds were cut off, abandoned, or thrown into ruin. To the Tau, this chaos opened new paths. They could move where once they could not. They could reach places that had not seen light in years. The fifth sphere launched with purpose. Worlds once tied to the Imperium now heard new voices. The Water Caste moved ahead, offering aid where others had brought only silence. Drones restored power grids. Earth Caste builders brought clean water. Fire Caste patrols brought security. And always the greater good followed. But this expansion met more than broken systems. It met resistance. The Death Guard rose in plague-filled clouds. Tyrannid fleets cut through the stars without warning. Chaos cults stirred beneath cities that had forgotten peace. The Tau did not retreat. They adapted. This sphere did not bring only glory. It brought loss. Whole fleets vanished. Commanders fell. But still the Empire moved forward. It had grown too large to stop, too set in motion to turn back. In some places, humans joined willingly, not as servants, but as partners, auxiliaries in fire caste units, traders under water caste guidance, workers and thinkers who accepted the offer of order. Not all were treated as equals. But none were treated as less than tools, and for many, that was enough. The greater good had become more than a vision. It had become policy, a rhythm, a machine that pulled in all who stood near. It did not crush, it absorbed. But the farther the Tau reached, the more they changed. The fifth sphere was not like the first. The Caste still stood, the Ethereal still led, but the shape of the empire had stretched. Some began to ask if the greater good still meant what it once did, or if it had become something else. The answer is not clear. The Tau Empire continues. It grows through choice and chance, through peace and battle. Its light spreads across dark corners of the galaxy, reaching towards stars no longer watched by the Imperium. Some see it as hope, others as danger. But one truth remains. The Tau do not stop. In a galaxy filled with endless war, the Tau chose another path. They did not rise from gods or ancient ruin. They were not shaped by prophecy or curse. They built their place with purpose, with vision, with belief that unity could be stronger than fire. But peace has its own cost. Their empire now reaches across stars that once belonged to others. Their message carries calm, but it also carries rules. Their order brings comfort, but not always freedom. And still, they press forward. The Tau believe in something larger than self. The greater good is more than words to them. It is the shape of their world. It is the reason they fight. It is the answer they give when all other lights go out. Others see them as naive, as dangerous, as something that cannot last. But in the still corners of space, the Tau remain.
They whisper their message.
They wait for those willing to listen, and even now they expand.